In this process of rethinking about the humanities and trying to bring together different research networks and teams and so on, I was lucky to meet at some stage Stephen Archer. Stephen is an expert, he's professor in Sweden, he's an expert in the field of environmental humanities. There's a network to which he belongs, which was established initially or within the framework of CHCI, which is the Consortium of Humanities Institutes and Humanities Centers and Institutes, yeah. But then it became more or less autonomous, if I understand correctly, and it engages a certain number of colleagues and observatories also in different parts of the world. And Stephen is going certainly to talk to us in depth within that environment. Thank you very much. We are growingly working together. We work together in the project with UNESCO on sustainability science, which was a Japan government-funded project. And now Stephen is trying to pull up with many of us a continuation of that project. Right? Yeah. Okay, Stephen, please.
Okay, thanks very much. And first, thanks to Luis and all of the great colleagues here in Macau, and to the Afalea Network for inviting me back for a second year. Last year was a turning point for me in getting a better understanding of the really interesting work going on in integrated, cultural integrated landscape work through Afalea, and getting a wider sense of the community that has been put together with such effectiveness, I think, through this network. So thanks very much. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the community that I've been involved in. In the process, I want to, at various times, return to the idea of what the humanities needs to be doing, I think, now more in response to global challenges, which of course are also always local challenges as well. And so to begin with, what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about the environmental humanities work that we've been doing, and who we are, who the various networks are that come together in the circumpolar north, where I'm most active, and the challenges that are sort of signaled in my title, are the big challenges having to do certainly with global environmental change, but also social environmental change. So biodiversity loss, human rights, education, global warming, climate change, threats to heritage that result as a result, that are results of many of these changes, and that are making it necessary to think about new adaptive processes and how societies can be more resilient to these changes. All of these things have tie-ins with really a framework that has been, over the last few years, getting promoted more and more, the 17 global goals, the Sustainable Development Goals. These cross over in very clear ways in many ways, and less clear ways in other ways. And the 17 global goals is not a perfect framework. There's room for development and improvement with these, but it is an important framework that had 193 countries in 2015 sign on to for meeting a series of goals by the year 2030 that would hopefully ensure that many of the changes occurring right now environmentally across the globe do not have the worst kinds of impacts possible on the planet and on communities and nations and cultures. So it's an important framework for us to be working within. And we've organized increasingly our own activities within the environmental humanities to be addressing many of these particular goals. I would say that the environmental humanities as a field didn't really exist 15 years ago in the way that it does now. It existed in sort of environmental humanities ways, I would say. But, and that was, essentially from, fields like environmental history, environmental archaeology, environmental anthropology. There are longer traditions going back much longer than just 15 years ago, obviously, into, you could say, the early 20th century in some fields, but certainly in the latter 20th century. What is different now is the interdisciplinary and transdisciplinary nature of connecting up these different communities with one another, the extent to which people in literature are reading the work of archaeologists, and people in archaeology are reading the work of the environmental historians or the art historians who are dealing with landscape studies and integrated approaches to environmental challenges in aesthetic and ethical fields and philosophy. This, I think, the cross-pollination that's going on across the pollinization that's going on across these different disciplines is a relatively recent phenomenon in a more sort of fully developed sense. So just to give you a sense, I mean, this field is, I think, maybe the major growth field in the humanities right now, and there's lots of evidence of that. The number of centers in environmental humanities that have popped up just in the last 5 to 10 years is really remarkable. And this just is the tip of the iceberg right here. It seems like new centers around the world are opening or launching all the time. So here's just a few from a European context. We have journals that have also really developed and proliferated in the last 5 to 10 years that are also devoted not strictly to just a particular field like history, or not strictly to a field like literature or eco-criticism, but to the interdisciplinary engagement across these different disciplines. And certainly book series, academic book series, conferences are happening all the time. I think it's really hard to find a month of the year where there's not some environmental humanities conference going on, or sometimes 2 or 3 of them around the world. And so this community has grown and grown. And then, of course, the associations, the different scholarly associations that have been have come together in support of different branches of this community are further evidence of this. So you've got down to the far right here the European Association for the Study of Literature, Culture, and Environment. You've got ASLI, which is the eco-criticism field, which combines cultural studies, literature, film, and other aesthetic and philosophical disciplines. That's the Association for the Study of Literature and Environment, but it encompasses much more than just in literature. My network that I've led for most of the last 10 years in the Nordic countries is called NICE, the Nordic Network for Interdisciplinary Environmental Studies. And we began essentially as historians and literary scholars, and some area study scholars like Americanist and Scandinavian studies, American studies and Scandinavian studies, that already had a bit of a multidisciplinary or interdisciplinary engagement already baked into these because they were not single disciplines but area studies fields. We were supported for 5 years by the Nordic Council of Ministers, this network, and after our Nordforsk funding ran out a couple of years ago, we began to be, I'll come back to that. We sponsor symposia and seminars. We sponsor the kinds of get-togethers that Luis has done here so successfully for many years. We sponsor similar ones, and some of them we do together with national or international associations, and some of them are more of this nature where you have essentially everything in plenum. All of the community is listening to everyone else in the community, and that way trying to move away from knowledge silos and the sort of bifurcation of discourse communities and scholarly communities, which really is not the way for us to be going any longer. And so those are just some glimpses of, and we've organized field schools for the 4th year. Actually, the deadline is today. For the 4th year in 7, we're having a field school in Northern Iceland that combines cultural anthropology, archaeology, literary studies, environmental history, and historical ecology involving some of the biological and geosciences, where students go and visit active field sites over a couple of weeks and work in a very interdisciplinary way. And increasingly, we're trying to push for working in transdisciplinary ways. And I'll come back to that a little bit later in the talk. Here's our home now. This is Sigtuna Stiftelsen. This is the Sigtuna Foundation, which is about 20 minutes from the international airport in Stockholm. And it sits right above the oldest continuously inhabited town in Sweden, which is Sigtuna, which was founded during the Viking era. Now that our Nordic Council of Ministers funding has run out, they've taken over funding some core activities for us. So we have a lot of our meetings there, a lot of them sponsored by the Sigtuna Foundation, which is a wonderful organization devoted to interdisciplinary dialogue and meeting social and ecological challenges. Now, this Nordic network morphed, I would say, into the latest addition to what Luis was referring to at the beginning in his introduction, which is the establishment of the Humanities for the Environment Global Network. And that network formed through some Mellon funding that was given to the Humanities Centers and Institutes organization a number of years ago. And after that funding ran out, the project continued no longer as a project, but as increasingly as a community. We have 8 observatories now. The Australian Observatory was one of the founding ones. So too was the European Observatory. The Australian Observatory is based at Sydney Environment Institute in Sydney, Australia. The European Observatory is based at Trinity College Dublin, led by Paul Holm in Dublin. We have a Latin American observatory, which is one of our newest ones, connecting up the entire Central America and South America in different contexts, especially right now in Amazonia. And then we have the North American Observatory, one of the first partners as well. We have an African observatory, and the North American Observatory, by the way, is based at Arizona State University, and Joni Adamson leads that network, or that observatory. The African Observatory is led by James Ugude at the University of Pretoria, and is based out of their Advanced Study for the Humanities Center there. We have 2 Asian observatories, oddly, and both of them are in Taiwan. And don't ask me how that developed, but it did. It has to do with, I suppose, local traditions in that. And then finally, the Circumpolar Observatory is the one that the latest addition to this family, and that I head up, and which is based at Stephenson Arctic Institute in Iceland, and with 1 foot there and 1 foot at the Sigtuna Foundation in Sweden. And we were previously part of IHOPE as a core part of the core project, Integrated History and Future of People on Earth, which is a future Earth core project. And we have developed out of that this international, Circumpolar Observatory. And the Circumpolar Observatory, I should mention, has a general focus on the circumpolar north, not strictly just the Arctic, but subarctic as well, and connects up groups from Russia to the United States, Canada, Greenland, Iceland, Svalbard, and the Scandinavian countries, and also the UK. So our members come from different environments in all of those countries, and we have about 40 people who are part of the Circumpolar Network, and we support a number of different projects. And we go after different kinds of funding, international and national funding, to bring together constellations of researchers from different traditions, from different fields and disciplines working together around common problems. And that's the transdisciplinary approach that we've been taking, which I think is not typical of how the humanities, at least the humanities in my field, in literary studies, tends to organize itself. And our position is that it needs to begin thinking of organizing itself more in this way, doing more team work, working across disciplines, co-designing projects with people from other disciplines whose expertise we need, and they need our expertise as well. And the research problems that we are addressing need to be addressed through combining methods and combining sort of different epistemological traditions as far as how we approach these questions, And that extends all the way through the co-execution and co-development of knowledge through projects, and even co-dissemination. So for instance, I'll give you one example. We published, a year ago or so, a team-written paper in the journal Global and Planetary Change, and we were mostly humanists in the article, though, who produced the article. And that's, it's not typical for us to reach out to a global change journal, first of all, but second of all, to have such strong humanistic representation from anthropology, from archaeology, from history, and then some from geosciences as well, that are sort of all packed into this in literature studies, working together, doing teamwork in the field and in the archives, and then coming together and working on how we can synthesize our results into a common response to different problems. So having to do with global change. Now I want to go to, I just want to stay on top of my time. I think I'm about 15 minutes into this. Just want to double check, yeah. So we've been trying to connect up in different ways within our networks. Some of them having to do, some of them obviously anchored in formal education, in higher education and research studies for doctoral students and postdocs past the PhD level, but also in terms of traditions of public education, what in Scandinavia we call folkbildning. And I'll try to return to that briefly after I delve into some of the ways in which we're trying to also connect up more successfully with other sectors in society by bringing the researchers who are right on the front line of developing new knowledge in response to challenges, sustainability challenges among other ones, to other segments of society where this knowledge needs to be applied in various ways more successfully. And so developing conversations with some of these actors through mediated projects of various kinds is where we've been putting a lot of our emphasis. So I'm going to show you a resource that we've developed here to give you a sense of how we're trying to do that and the different groups we're trying to connect with more successfully. The idea is to create immersive conversations in the public, and those conversations can take place digitally online, and they can also take place in space, in places, and at specific times, event-driven activities that are dialogical, rather than the experts just talking to people and people passively listening and then going away without necessarily engaging. We try to involve more and more stakeholders from these communities. We try to create multimodal events that have media and arts components, as well as dialogical workshops where we're breaking down that wall between knowledge providers and other co-participants, and actually trying to encourage feedback loops between these different publics and the public and the discourse community that we represent as researchers. We're working to experiment with new modes of storytelling and co-produce knowledge with different stakeholders and societal partners from different sectors in a variety of ways. And this, again, I would say, with some notable exceptions, this isn't typically how the humanities, at least in terms of certain traditions of the humanities that I come out of literary studies, out of history, philosophy, textually based, a lot of them textually based literary studies. You're going to find all sorts of interesting examples of individuals who engage with the public in really interesting ways. But I think that we haven't seen enough structural work to encourage this kind of collaboration with different societal partners. And I think that that's where we really need to be pushing more and more. And I think through organizations like Athalea and through organizations like CIPSH and UNESCO and other partners that we've been trying to work more closely with in recent years, we have an opportunity to influence policy in ways that can make these approaches more successful and more supported within different national contexts. And that's where we've been putting a lot of our efforts. So I'll just, here are some of the different partners that we've we've been really prioritizing partnerships with, beyond UNESCO and SIPS and beyond FLEA in a more Swedish context, but also with a great international reach. We're working with the Nobel Prize Museum and the Nobel Foundation, and that gives us a tremendous opportunity to connect with many, many actors. You know, the week that including putting together packets, suggested packets on curriculum development, dealing with different kinds of issues, but this year the one will be focusing on sustainability. We did that a couple of years ago as well, and trying to connect up with secondary schools more successfully through the Nobel Foundations or the Nobel Prize Museums teacher education series, which they've organized in the last couple of years, a really successful global teacher summit where they bring teachers in from all over the world to Nobel Museum to give very hands-on practical advice about how they can more successfully be dealing with certain kinds of challenges that are really the great challenges right now, and integrate this more successfully into the classroom through using digital resources that become available through their own network. So they get millions of hits on their website the week that the Nobel Prizes are announced, and so strategically they're working to make sure that materials get put out right at that time, that many teachers will have access to, and then through them their students can have access to. Now, one of the ways that within my own network, within Humanities for the Environment Circumpolar Observatory, and within the NICE network, the Nordic Network for Interdisciplinary Environmental Studies, we've been working to try to break down that barrier more and more between the research community and certainly in higher education, but also in secondary education, the sort of educational stakeholder communities, so that we can, and we're doing this by trying to approach storytelling and framing of questions in some ways traditional ways, and in other ways different ways. And our idea is that we can build upon the community that we bring together, and we do a lot of reflective soul searching amongst ourselves about what is it that our knowledge community can bring to the table that we need to more successfully sort of engage with other stakeholders and in dialogue about, and how can that knowledge be useful. And I can show you a couple of examples of the media products that we've done. I'm going to skip by this one and go right to, here's Tom McGovern, my colleague from the North Atlantic Biocultural Organization, working with me in the north. You can bring the lights down a little bit, maybe?
In the short term, I think some of our biggest challenges, at least in the area that I work in the North Atlantic, have to do with rising sea level, increasing storminess, to coastal landscapes, which include resources, fixed resources like harbors and ports, which include a lot of people's homes, would also include heritage sites like cemeteries, like castles, places that are great meeting people. And from an archaeological standpoint, a great many archaeological sites extend back thousands of years in the past, which we're now increasingly realizing can be made use of through a range of new techniques to give us information we can find no other way about past environments, about past climate change, which can help to inform us about what is happening to us in the future. So we have a need to rally resources across the world to respond to these kinds of threats, which can't be stopped by stopping bulldozer. The sea isn't going to be turned back by us enacting a law. Rising sea level and increasing storminess pose a threat not only to known and recently discovered heritage sites, but also to the scientific record that we need to better understand and to reconstruct changing climate through time. One of the things we're discovering is that archaeological sites are an incredible archive for information about the past distribution of animals and plants, about occurrence, about food web, that we never realized we could access until the development of ancient DNA studies and isotopic studies that are broadening every week. It's a bitter irony that just as we're really getting ourselves in position to make use of these incredibly rich stratified archives taking us back thousands of years in the past, they are being destroyed. This is the Library of Alexandria, full of knowledge, unique, unknown, and it is being burned. It is on fire as we speak. We need international help. We need coordinated effort to rescue what we can while we can.
So one of the things Tom's referring to, of course, is that with increased storminess, there are archaeological sites that are being revealed in one storm and wiped away in the very next storm. The erosion is not gradual. Because of the storminess, in some cases, there have been cases where in a single storm, certain reefs, certain archaeological sites have come to our knowledge that then in the very next storm can be completely lost. And this is partly a result of certainly of climate change, but there's drastic changes going on in the circumpolar north. And so part of what we're trying to do is to take this sort of multidisciplinary and interdisciplinary and increasingly transdisciplinary approach to how we can address these kinds of issues, and working with local communities in a variety of ways to heighten their own knowledge of the resources that are available to them, and also to draw upon their knowledge in various ways that allow us to more successfully understand in situ the cultural context. At the same time, we're also trying to bring to the attention of the wider world exactly what it is that's at stake here in more engaging, hopefully engaging ways, but also in ways that can reach a wider audience. And to do that, we have organized social media campaigns that we're working together with our website, Bifrost Online. I'll let you just see one more quick little minute and a half example of this kind of resource we've been building, and I'll tell you more about that in a second.
The project was a collaborative project that we developed in the International Polar Year with Inuit hunters and geomatics engineering students to come together and develop a tool that hunters can use to document their observations of the environment as they're doing their activities. So in the past, in documenting Inuit knowledge, we had relied on interviewing people, we used a lot of maps, but they had to recall what they had seen when they were out traveling. In this project, we wanted to develop a tool that hunters could take with them, so as they're traveling on the ice or on the land and they see animals or they see different sea ice conditions, they can simply touch a computer screen and it logs their observation immediately in time and space, and we can look at that information later.
So Shar is from the National Snow and Ice Data Center. She's one of our partners. She's been involved with us in different in different contexts and in different project contexts. And so we're both trying to illustrate and showcase knowledge coming out of our own community, but important knowledge communities around the world that are trying to achieve the same goals. I'm going to jump past a few of these just to give you a sense. I did want to give you a little bit of a sense. I can do this with I think I can do this with this one. Sorry, I'm hitting the wrong. I'm not a PC user. So here I've kind of jumped past it, but here's an example of what we've been doing with Nobel Museum. We have these events for teachers. We were able to connect the year before last with about 1,500, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 school students who came to the Nobel Museum, watched a film that we produced, and worked with the pedagogues at Nobel Museum who worked with researchers in our network about how to develop more successful approaches to help teachers, high school teachers and junior high school teachers, but also the students themselves, better understand the principles of the Sustainable Development Goals, and also how they could begin to work with the resources that have been getting built up around the global goals in different classroom contexts, and in contexts that run all the way from the hard sciences and the natural sciences through to the arts, with the social sciences and the humanities in there as well. And so we've organized special evening events where in very hands-on ways, we're working with, where we've reached about 250 teachers in these contexts. And then we've reached, almost 10 times or seven or 8 times as many students. And they're very interactive. It's not us talking to a large audience. We get together and we work together around different problems, and this is the approach that we've been taking. And we think that, of course, it's very important to, I thought I'd show you one more example of a different way we're using the interview materials, which we've shot ourselves. These are our own developed materials in other kinds of installation contexts sometimes. Example from one of our installations that we had.
And so I'm concerned about the environment, but I'm usually concerned about the planetary environment, the ozone layer, global warming, large-scale things that occur in different parts and actually cross political boundaries. And I got involved in this back in the early 90s at Massachusetts Institute of Technology with a group called the Humanities in Defense of the Environment. And what we were looking for was a place at the table with the scientists and with the policymakers, because we felt that the humanities had a lot to offer in kind of an applied way, kind of a practical way of thinking that what people write about matters and how people think about the world they live in. The idea that you can take a historical message to a place like a policy decision-making place. I testified to Congress last year in the U.S. because they wanted to know about this idea of climate engineering. And I said, well, it certainly is not unprecedented. People have thought about this before. And I think you should understand a bit about history as you move forward to make your future decisions. Now, I don't make the policy decisions. I just try to bring usable history, generate what we call a usable past, to bring it to bear on current public policy issues. And I'm not an engineer, and I can't do everything, but I think having humanists on the team is a very important step to take to help make the team a little more resilient and much broader in their ability to communicate.
So this is just a little clip from it. We organized, and this is a virtual triptych. We actually have put up in a variety of different contexts, public contexts, conferences, certainly academic conferences, but not only academic conferences, and so forth, different installations built on this triptych model where you interact with it in a very different way. This is the only way we could put it online, by putting it up as a virtual triptych, but spatial installations in a variety of ways are things that we've been working with over the last few years. We've developed, what are hundreds, well over 100 hours of interview materials with, in some cases, leading figures, leading thinkers, leading scholars within the fields, not only of the environmental humanities, but climate science and other related fields, and even including the biodiversity area and so forth, but also with stakeholders, with people from communities who are on the front lines of global environmental change right now, trying to actually bring their perspectives, their stories, their knowledge, which is equally important to our successful ability to address these issues, especially in specific local contexts where there will be variables from one context to the next that need to seriously be taken into consideration, and where we really need to have partnerships working with people, and they have to want to work with us as well, obviously, and where we're working to bridge these gaps. Now, one of the things I'd like to do is to sort of give you a sense of the online resource that we've developed. It's called Bifrost Online. I'm going to do just a quick tour of it for you. You can find it right there, and it's based upon the media work that we've been developing over the last 8 years in our networks. All of these interviews that we've been shooting, but also the different kind of artwork that we've been producing. So a lot of what we do on Bifrost Line is to disseminate media that we have ourselves produced, but an even larger segment of the materials collected on this website, which include well over 1,000 media pieces now of various kinds. These are also curated from Creative Commons sources around the country and then displayed under different themes. We changed the theme out almost in a kind of a magazine format. So here's a typical sort of theme, in this case, threats to heritage, where we'll have, in this case, 16 showcased pieces that are, some of which are articles, some of which are films, some of which are data visualizations. There's a wide variety of different kinds of types. But that's really just the tip of the iceberg, but because underneath those is a very, very extensive archive of other media materials. And these get reconfigured, again, in this kind of magazine format every couple of months with a new theme. We'd like to move to the point where we had the personnel capacity to be changing this out monthly, but we're not there yet because we just don't have those resources. But we're working on getting them. And down at the bottom, you can see here a selection of the different kinds of media forms that are accessible in the archive, a lot of them curated materials. All the things on this sort of gray line here are the things that we produce ourselves. The things below in the blue are the curated resources. And just to give you an example, you click on data visualizations, it will take you to a screen that then opens up where you have a bunch of different kinds of data visualizations. They're keyword searchable, they're organized that way by keyword that allows you to sort of go in and do focus searches in different ways that will bring together different materials as well. And then, that will take you, if you click on one of them, in this case, ocean circulation, it takes you to this page where you can read a little bit about that piece, you can get the bibliographic information you need about that, and then, of course, you can visit, you can actually click on and see the visualization itself in this case. I won't play the whole thing, but just to give you a sense. So, this is from NASA. And this isn't humanities, obviously, but that's an important principle here. I think what we're trying to do is more successfully integrate humanistic knowledge with other traditions of knowledge and other knowledge communities. That means that when we're foregrounding and showcasing different kinds of challenges and questions, we really also need to be embedding the humanities knowledge alongside other kinds of scientific knowledge and making it more accessible to non-specialists. And that's generally the idea. Here's one that was that was done on commission to us with somebody now who's sort of part of the wider Bifrost team. I'll give you a quick example. I may have showed this one last year here, but it's a really good example to show you of a different kind of media-driven project, the 100-year time-lapse project, where we're bringing the arts and the sciences together, we hope, for a more successful collaboration. So the same thing happens. This is a feature article. The feature article includes both video materials, it includes illustrative galleries of photos, and essentially a feature-length treatment, about a 2,000-word article of this particular project and what its value might be. So, I'll let you take a look at the really brief 3-minute video. It gives you a clearer sense.
So with the 100-year time-lapse project, we're demonstrating that we can look back at archival aerial photographs and use them to visualize changes in glacial landscapes that span over centuries. So this is photographs from a flight that's happened in 1909. It was a balloon flight. We're here pretty much underneath the flight path of where Edward Spelterini flew over. And so as he took off from Chamonix and passed by the Mer de Glace, he's taken a whole sequence of photographs. And out of that sequence there's one in particular which he reused himself, and this is the one that we're going to reproduce. And we'll try and recreate as closely as possible using the GPS coordinates. In this photograph, what's unusual for Spelterini is that he's framed the glacier, is obviously what he's interested in. It's the sweep of the glacier is so eye-catching that it's the kind of main focus of this image. So we'll be taking many photographs that replicate the flight path of the original balloon flight. It was a process of taking those two-dimensional photographs and generating a three-dimensional structure, so we can get this this sense of movement and sense of the three-dimensional form of the landscape as we transition from the original historical photographs to the current day. So you can get a sense of scale in a measured way, but what's really important is also to contextualize those changes in the landscape that we can come and visit, that we can walk around. And that's something that comes across in the original photographs, and we want to try and continue this tradition of treating the recording of glacial landscapes not just as a scientific process, but also as a process of generating artworks.
That gives you a little bit better sense of that then. I'm just going to, and what we're doing is we're trying to find new examples of ways that sciences, humanities, arts can collaborate successfully together. And that's obviously very strongly in evidence at a meeting like this. And so I think part of that story for us moving forward should be to try to find ways in which we can develop synergies with our partner networks, with the Afalea community, work together, new projects, but also how can we begin to share information more successfully and stories more successfully and our knowledge and findings more successfully. Certainly it's important amongst ourselves, but also with the other members of society, the other stakeholders who may not have access to this knowledge or may not have been given sort of context for it. And there's a lot of work to go yet, because to have a successful reach with this kind of popular scientific approach to things requires a lot of effort. It requires resources, not all of which we have fully right now. So we've built the resource, but we have to more successfully connect it up with different actors. And then I'm just going to finish up here by pointing out, sorry about that, this is all on presets, so I have to, and of course, you know, we have different literary studies, eco-criticism is emphasized alongside some of these others, looking at, for instance, the new tradition of climate fiction, and then you've seen Tom McGovern's already. But the way that these resources are organized, I can simply show you, I need to open a new tab to do that. How do I do that on a PC?
Oh, do you want a new window?
A new window, yeah.
You go up on the plus, right?
Up here, okay, all right. I'm sorry, I'm a Mac user, so I'm hopeless about this kind of stuff. But I'll just show you the website. It's developed quite a bit since I put this Prezi together. And the resources that it includes we're really also looking to build, we're also looking to build a much more interactive platform in a new iteration of this. And that's something that we hope we will be able to do together with SIPSH, together with Afalea, together with UNESCO and other projects. So here's the current sort of issue of Bifrost Online. And I'll just page down a little bit so you can get us, and you know, it's the same principle. We include, there's a lot of Creative Commons stuff that we curate around different challenges, but among the different, the real potential as an archive that is there in all of these different media elements that are down below. Right now we've got over 1,000, and we'll have probably a year from now have about double that. And a lot of them are produced ourselves, but a lot of them are brought in from other sources. And you can, you know, it's hard to get a full sense of the scale of this, but you can, there's just so many different materials that one can look at here. And so the best way to do it is go around and click around and see what you can come up with by just sort of exploring the site on your own. And, but, you know, it leads to each media type will lead to many different stories, many different kinds of projects that we're showcasing that we feel can illustrate the potential for how we can begin to work together more successfully. I guess if one final thought that I would end with here would be that the humanities needs to change, by and large, the way it does work. You know, holding yourself up in the stacks and in a room all by yourself for 10 years and producing a monograph, that is still one important tradition and way of producing knowledge in the humanities. But it's not the model that I think the humanities can, by and large, be doing exclusively in this time and age, where the time frame, where the horizon is increasingly shorter between the horizon to act. So right now, when we're talking about the global goals, the 17 global goals, I mean, we have a time frame of 2030, and a lot of things have to be achieved, and it's by no means certain that we're going to be able to achieve those goals in that time. We're certainly not going to be able to if the humanities remains on the sideline, if the humanities has little to no interaction with policymakers or with other sectors from society. And in management and responses, creative responses to the challenges that are facing our world and our communities right now. And this is where Afalea and organizations like Afalea and like our network, NICE, and our Humanities for the Environment Network are absolutely crucial. We need to be more aggressive and actually trying to find our way of connecting up successfully with policymakers and finding creative solutions to the challenges facing the world right now. And so I'm hoping that more and more people will come on board with what I think is essentially the transdisciplinary approach that we're really promoting. And I guess that's probably all I have time for.
We have some time for questions.
Oh, do we? Okay.
Anyone? Yes?
Okay.
It's really wonderful. We're both feeling very enthusiastic about the kind of work that you and these organizations that you associate with. It's good. I was trying to count the number of times the word engineering was mentioned. It was a few times, 4 or 5 at least. My special project, the one of mine, is trying to integrate humanities education into engineering curriculum. And I agree 100% with your premise that the humanities need a new paradigm. You can't simply take the traditional kind of humanities course and require engineering students to take it and expect very much interesting stuff. Now, sort of the insinuation of humanities into the engineering curriculum is a very difficult thing to do. They're usually overcrowded.
Yeah.
But there are ways around that when you think in terms of things like project-based learning, where collaborations of this sort would be very good and very easy to do and very much in keeping with the sort of progressive engineering pedagogy that's developing. But there's a kind of resistance within many engineering schools, and I work with a few of them, to this kind of thing. Some years ago, I published a paper in which I proposed that there be a new alliance, I called it, between engineering educators and humanists. And mostly the feedback was negative from the engineering side. That's not our job. We don't need to do it. Engineers are very excited about developing collaborations with business schools, with law schools. They're interested in, they have, like we heard yesterday, this sort of paradigm of innovation, but by innovation they mean developing new gadgets and products that can get quickly to market, and that's what their mindset is. So I'm just wondering, what experience have you had in trying to implant this kind of spirit and this kind of material into engineering curricula, and what suggestions do you have about succeeding?
Yeah, I mean, it is challenging. I think the major obstacles for transdisciplinary collaboration are institutional, they're structural, It has to do with how disciplines are funded, which often is tied to a structure within the universities, and maybe within a national context about how the universities get funded by the government, if it's a state university system like Sweden's is. And the difficulty there, what we really need when we talk about innovation, I think, is social innovation. The gadgets can, you know, they're attractive and they get people's attention and people get excited about them, and they maybe, you know, they're marketable and they can be tied to development on the economic marketplace. But I think really where we find ourselves now is we have to create innovative solutions. Right now we're all dealing with workarounds to the structural problems of collaboration across these disciplines. My sense is that part of what we need to do to overcome these obstacles is, of course, create more effective interfaces, which has to do with developing literacies. So we in the humanities have to become more engineering literate. We need to be more natural science literate, and even social sciences literate. And likewise, I think our colleagues who see the value in collaborating in this way need to become more culturally literate, need to be more humanistically, philosophically literate as far as understanding what are the ethical implications of some of the projects that they're working to develop. How is this actually in specific social contexts? What will be the repercussions of more widespread use of this particular technology? I've seen in different contexts more or less successful collaborations between engineering fields and some humanistic disciplines, like at the Royal Institute of Technology in Stockholm. At the core of what they've been doing in the true humanistic environment there is philosophy and its history of science. And in that connection, they often can think of ways, because they're focusing so much on the history of science, of making that humanistic historical knowledge accessible and interesting to people who have a different orientation, different methodological orientation, and I think that there's this underlying suspicion among a lot of natural scientists and other hard sciences people that humanistic discourse is too relativistic, and that you can't pin it down, and it just seems like I'm overstating the case here, but it seems like too much fluff. Yeah, but there's an equal suspicion among humanists and people coming from the arts that natural sciences people are too positivistic, and I think that each of these viewpoints is understandable to a degree, and each of these viewpoints is also a lot more wrong in terms of potential than they have to be. But there's reasons, and there's understandable reasons why these views persist. And there are different epistemological traditions that different knowledge communities are working out of that make that bridging harder. So what we need to do, I think, is to create those bridges. And the bridges are done in project-driven contexts, I think, sometimes. You have to have the social innovation, and that social innovation can be built into an educational context, it can be built into a research context, but there's got to be something that you're rallying around together. You've got to find a lingua franca, you've got to develop literacy, mutually intelligible literacies, and sometimes that means overcoming the linguistic differences where, it's hard to have a lingua franca when what you mean when you use this word is very different from what I mean when I use that word. So having this wider knowledge, this is hard work. Transdisciplinarity will never happen by itself. You have to create the space for that dialogue to occur, and out of that dialogue to build common understandings. You don't have to become expert in one another's disciplines, but you at least have to be able to speak with some knowledge about what the tradition is they're coming out of, what their explicit or implicit goals are, and how they may often align well with much better with your own in a humanistic coming out of a humanistic context than you may realize. But that conversation has to be created first, and the space for that conversation has to be created first. And that's why, frankly, we need to work on policymakers, on education and science policymakers, to create new ways of incentivizing that hard work that has to take place, because it will not happen by itself. The structures that are right now will continually confound that process or obstruct that process unless we find creative solutions.
Yeah, I agree with everything you're saying. It's going to take many hands, and that's why the organizational networks that you're describing yourself, promising and important. And so I applaud it. I think, speaking of sort of epistemological perspectival differences, I mean, engineers have this sort of deep set idea that you don't need to know more than you need to know. So I have a friend who's working a number of people are working in bioengineering, but they do not want to learn biology. And they think the discipline of biology is sort of anachronistic and beside the point. They think they could master it without collaboration. I have another colleague who's working on carbon sequestration. This is important and for which there are all sorts of obvious links, but doesn't think there's any need for it.
Right.
You know, so this is an additional sort of bump in the road, but I agree with everything you said. So thank you.
Thank you. Quite a bit over time now, so I should.
I want to congratulate you and say thank you. What you presented here, it's really inspiring, and I do believe this is the way. And while you were showing pieces of your project, there was one thing that captured very much my attention: the 100-time-year lapse.
Yeah.
Because this summer we had here in Macau for a couple of weeks an artistical residence on photography.
Okay.
And with two young photographers, we just went on the field and take pictures of the landscape, transformation of the landscape, mainly very much focusing on the problem we have here with forest fires and how it affects the territory. And as we were doing that, we came across some very old pictures, aerial pictures from the 40s and the 50s.
Okay.
Of course, we didn't engage on a project of doing new aerial or comparing, but I do believe it would be a very nice thing to do here, related with the consequences of climate change and the aridification of this region, but also focusing on the transformation and somehow degradation of the landscape as a consequence of intensive forest.
Right.
That is ruining the soils, together with long, hot and dry summers, forest fires. And in some parts of Macau, there's nothing growing anymore, just herbs and invasive exogenous species.
Right.
So this is a very nice idea. Yeah.
But I think these are approaches that can and often you'll have these moments of serendipity. Right? These things, wow, there's this amazing source material here that we didn't know about, and that's true certainly of archives, where our projects are trying in different ways to be looking at unexamined archives, and we're re-looking at the ones that have been examined, but with a different set of lenses now, with environmental challenges firmly in mind, that wouldn't have been on the minds of researchers 50 years ago necessarily in the same way.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.